Okay, here's something from a guy named Ben Temples. It's also worth noting that Christ said that he would be lifted up and draw all people to himself. So how does that work? Now, this really is a great question, and it's one worth spending a little bit of time on. Okay, so here we are. Big verse on this whole conversation. Jesus said, and when I am lifted up from the earth, and when I'm lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. And I really don't think this means every single individual person will be drawn to Jesus when he dies on the cross or because of the gospel. And that may sound like special pleading. I don't think it is. Let's put this in context, okay? Let's roll back here. Look at this. Now, among those who went up to worship at the feast were some Greeks. That's non-Jews right here, okay? So non-Jews. These came and asked Philip, we wish to see Jesus. So you have non-Jews, Greeks, asking to see Jesus. They go tell Jesus, and Jesus says, okay, now it's time for the Son of Man to die and to be glorified. And then he starts talking about his death. And then he says this, what shall I say, Father, save me from this hour? For this purpose I've come to this hour. God says, I have glorified it and will glorify it again. And then listen, now the ruler of this world will be cast out. This is the judgment of the world. Now will the rule of this world be cast out, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. I think he's saying here all kinds of people, not just Jews. I didn't just come to die for Jews. No, some Greeks are asking for me. That's a signal that it's my time to die, and I'm dying for all the world. I'm dying to save people from every tribe and tongue and people and nation. And this word all can mean both every single one without distinction and every single kind without exception. So the word all can mean either of those things. And so here I think it means not all without exception, but all without distinction. And the reason I say that is because of this word draw. Okay, now let's look at this word draw here. The word draw, to drag, to draw, to pull. Let's see how this word is used. I may have to make this font smaller. This is the same exact word used. So the word used here for draw, all people to myself, is the same word used. Well, first of all, I need to show you. It's used in John's gospel to describe hauling in fish. They drew in the fish, pulled them in, and Simon Peter went about and hauled the net ashore. So it's this idea of effectively drawing someone in. It's to pull, to bring on, to draw is effective here. He's hauling them on shore. But let's see how it's used in John chapter 6. This is going to give us a huge cross-reference for how draw all people to myself is being used in John's gospel. The Jews grumbled because he said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. They said, isn't this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How could he be the Messiah? We know this kid. We knew him when he was a kid. And he now says, I've come down from heaven. We knew him growing up in Nazareth. Jesus answered, do not grumble among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. This is the exact same word that was used for drawing all people to himself, okay? This is the exact same word. And here's what Jesus says. This is an amazing statement here. Jesus says, no one can come to me. Now, this cannot be ignored or overlooked. Let's make that yellow here. So look at this. No one can come to Jesus. Zero exceptions to this. Zero people on earth can, that is, have the moral ability to choose Jesus, to spiritually come to Jesus. And if you're wondering what that means in context, you just go back to verse 35. What does it mean to come to Jesus? Jesus said, I'm the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger. Whoever believes in me shall never thirst. Coming to Jesus is parallel to believing in Jesus. And it means coming to him truly believing that he's the bread of life and that he can satisfy the hungers of your soul and the thirst of your soul. It's coming to Jesus to have your soul's hungers and thirsts satisfied in him because he's the living bread, the living water. Okay, that's what it means to come to Christ. It means to believe in him for salvation and to come to him for life. So here Jesus says, zero people on earth have the moral ability to do that, to come to Jesus as the bread of life, to feast on Jesus as the sole satisfaction of their life. No one wants to do that. No one's able to do that morally unless there's one thing that makes all the difference. Unless the Father who sent me draws, or later drags, right, hauls in. The Father draws him. And here's how the typical libertarian free will response to this is. Yeah, of course that's true. We believe prevenient grace is necessary in order to get us to trust in Christ, but we were locked in sin. Prevenient grace pushes us into a place of moral neutrality, and we can either choose Jesus or not choose Jesus, but the ultimate decisive vote is cast by us. That's what free will means. Otherwise, we're robots. Otherwise, we're not responsible for our decisions. I'm a compatibilist who believe that both our moral responsibility and God's actual ordination of our choices are compatibilized, go together in the mind of God. I think that's taught right here. So no one has the moral ability to come unless the Father draws me. Now, is this a drawing that God does to everybody? Because right now it's sounding pretty strong for the Arminian free will side, because it sounds like God is going to draw the whole world to him. When I'm lifted up, I will draw all people, all unto myself. Well, it sounds like every single person. And here it sounds like God draws everybody, but not everyone actually chooses to come. So we can't come to Christ without God's help drawing and wooing us, but we can still resist God's drawing and ultimately say no to coming. So God may draw 100 people out of 100 and only 20 come to Christ. So God's drawing is only effective some of the time. Is that what this text is teaching? And I want to be humble, but I also want to be clear. The answer is no. I say this sincerely. It can't be teaching that. Here's why. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. Now, do you see this? Now, look at the him here. Unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day. The him who is drawn is the him who is raised. And that means that's referring to resurrection unto life. So no one can come to the Father, can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. And if the Father draws him, Jesus will raise him. This is a salvation raise him. So everyone who is drawn, him who is drawn is him who is raised on the last day. It's not as though he draws 100 people and only 20 people come to him and are raised. No, this is a 100% success rate between those who are drawn and those who are raised. And I know you're probably skeptical right now. I can hear the fingers typing on the keyboard on the YouTube comments to say that's not what the text is saying. But I want to strengthen the argument. Let's keep going. Jesus is going to defend what he just said by quoting Isaiah 54. It is written. So Jesus is saying this to back up. He says this and he backs it up with scripture, right? It is written in Isaiah 54 in the prophets, quote, and they will all be taught by God. Okay, now watch this here. Okay, they will all be taught of God, all right? And what in the world? Taught by God. Taught by God, okay. They will all be taught by God. Now look at this. We're going to try to figure out what that means. Everyone who has heard and, I'm going to highlight this, learned from the Father. Are you following where this is going? Comes to me. Now this is amazing. I hope you can see what I'm about to say before I say it. So absolutely zero people are morally able to choose Christ unless God does something. The question is what God does provisionism or prevenient grace that puts us in a moral state of neutrality so we can choose or not choose? We can resist or not resist God's call on our life. Or is it an effective work where God's drawing guarantees our willing? Does God's drawing guarantee that we necessarily and freely and truly choose Christ? Or is God's drawing a provisionary but not a guarantee of the result? I'm going to say it's a guarantee of the result. This is compatibilism. Now listen, no one is morally able to come to Christ unless something happens. The Father who sent me draws him. And I'm going to argue the drawing him is always effective because Jesus says, and I will raise him up on the last day. So if the him is drawn, that him is raised. You say, I don't buy that. Okay. Jesus backs it up with Isaiah 54. It is written in the prophets, quote, and they will all be taught by God. Now at this point, the Arminian probably feels pretty good because they say, look, God teaches all, but not all come. God draws all, but not all come. God can draw somebody and they can still not come. It's ultimately up to their will. Their will is ultimately decisive. They ultimately are self-determining in their will. And I want to say, let's be honest, that's not what this text is saying. Look, again, Jesus backs this up. You can't come to me unless the Father draws him, and I'll raise him on the last day. Let me explain what I mean with the Old Testament. It's written in Isaiah the prophet, in the prophets, and they will all, Is this every single person on earth, or is that only the elect? Okay? Is this every person, or is it the elect from every group? They will all be taught by God. So, God drawing you is called God teaching you. Teaching you what? Teaching you to trust Jesus. Teaching you to come to Jesus, right? He's like a tutor who comes along and trains you in doing something. He's teaching you how to be saved, teaching you how to trust Christ. And who does God teach? He teaches all. Well, that sounds Arminian. That sounds libertarian free will. That sounds like God teaches everybody, but not everyone wants to be taught. Thank you very much. And some of us resist, and others give in. Well, what is it saying? No. They will all be taught by God. And then look, everyone, now this has got to be the same as this, right? All who are taught by God is the same as everyone. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Now that is breathtaking for compatibilism. So look, one more time. I know it sounds like I'm laboring a point too much, but I'm telling you, I am very slow to grasp what these statements are actually saying, and lingering over this for a while is so worth it, because when you see it, it's like 3D pops out and you go, oh my goodness, that's what that text is saying. And it can change your life. If you don't believe this yet, this text could change your life. It's changed my life, sincerely. These kinds of texts have changed my life regarding God's sovereignty. So look, Jesus says, no people on earth can come to me morally. No one is able morally to come to Christ, to choose Christ, unless God does something, unless the Father who sent me draws him. This drawing of him is effective because that same him who is drawn is the him who is raised to salvation on the last day. Jesus backs it up with Isaiah. It is written in the prophets, and they will all, who's the all? Be taught by God. What happens to everybody who's taught by God? Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father. So learning from the Father and being taught by God, these are the same groups. I hope that's obvious. All are taught by God, everyone who's learned from the Father. Those are two ways of saying the same thing. So God's going to teach all of his elect, I'm going to argue, all of his elect will be taught to trust Christ. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. So no one can come to me unless the Father draws him, and everyone the Father draws, everyone who is taught, all who are taught, everyone who has heard and learned from the Father, every single one comes to me. Everyone who's learned from the Father comes to me. So no one comes to Jesus unless the Father draws and teaches him. Everyone, all whom the Father teaches, come to Christ. This is not libertarian free will. This is not provisionism. This is not prevenient grace. This is the effective sovereign call of God to salvation. If he teaches you to trust Christ, if you learn from him, if he teaches you to trust Christ, you're coming to Christ, 100% of you. And if he does not teach you, if he does not draw you, you will not be raised to salvation. You will not come to Christ because you'll be grumbling among yourselves, making fun of Jesus, not getting it, not wanting him because of your moral love of evil. That really is taught in this text. Okay, now what's the point? Let's apply this back to John chapter 12. Right? In John chapter 12, what does Jesus say? Let me pull it up. Now is the judgment of this world. Now will the ruler of this world be cast out, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. Now, do you see this? I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. This is the same word for draw used in John 6:44. And we can tell in context that everyone who is drawn is saved. Everyone who's drawn is raised on the last day to salvation. Everyone who's drawn is taught by God, and everyone taught by God comes to Christ. So this drawing is an effective drawing in John 6, so we must assume, unless there's a clear reason to the contrary, that this drawing is the same as the one in John 6. It's the same word in Greek. It's being used in the same kind of way. I think the burden of proof is on you to say that that's a different meaning of the word draw. No, it's the same kind of draw as John 6:44, so we know it's an effective draw. Everyone who's drawn is saved. So here, draw all, it's literally all to myself in the Greek. I think he means all kinds of people. In the context, Greeks have just come to see Christ. It's not just Jews. God's going to draw all kinds of people unto himself. And just let me back that up even more. we'll take this to Revelation 5. We were just there a couple of nights ago on our last Thursday together. And look what it says about Jesus when the Lamb who was slain. So here, the Lamb is, they're singing to the Lamb. They sang a new song saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, you died on the cross, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. You've made them a kingdom of priests to our God, and they shall reign forever on the earth." So look, this is an amazing text. Jesus was slain, and look at this. By your blood you ransomed people for God from. Now I'm going to put this up here for a second so we can see it. I'm going to split it into two parts. Now just look at this. You were slain, you died on the cross. By your blood you ransomed. It does not say you ransomed every person on the earth. It doesn't say you ransomed every tribe and language and people and nation. That's not what it says. This is an amazing particularist atonement text. It says, by your blood you ransomed. That's an effective thing. Everyone he ransoms is saved. Jesus' blood intentionally, his death was intended to ransom people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. He didn't die to ransom every single person in every nation. No, he died to ransom his own people, his sheep, his bride, his elect, his friends, his church. He specifically died to ransom people for God from every tribe. That's particular redemption. So again, the idea that Jesus, when he's lifted up, is drawing all people unto himself with prevenient grace is not true in the John context and not also here in the Revelation context. I hope that's helpful.